Chapter 721 Dreadful Threat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunny cut through the crew of the boarding ship, leaving no one alive. His towering figure moved among the enemies with incredible speed and grace, as if performing a macabre dance of death. His battle style was as shapeless and unpredictable as the devil himself, effortlessly switching from grounded defense to explosive offense, to monstrous ferocity that only a nightmare creature could possess. He fought with his four hands, with his fangs and horns, even with his armored tail. As more and more enemies fell, cut down by the burning blades, a scorching haze of evaporating blood surrounded him like a crimson mantle. Here and there, the two connected ships were already catching on fire, their sails burning in the dim red darkness of the night sky like funeral pyres for the warriors dying by his hand. And then, suddenly, there was no one left for him to kill. Dismissing the broken oath, Sunny groaned and leaned heavily on the cruel sight. His breath was labored and rugged, and the mantle of the underworld was covered by countless scratches. Beneath the onyx armor, his body was bruised and battered, with several shallow wounds seeping with blood where the enemy blades or aspect abilities had found their way through the cracks. Sunny gritted his teeth. How many ships did I take out? 3, 4. No, 5. He looked around, trying to ascertain the situation. The others had done well, too. Together with the gargoyles, the cohort had managed to destroy. His eyes widened. Almost half of the enemy fleet was gone. Dozens of ships were obliterated, thousands of brave warriors killed. A lion's share of that had been done by Cassie and the sailor dolls, as well as the gargoyles, but still. Sunny drew in a hoarse breath. When did we become so scary? The thought of being the big dreadful threat, for once, was refreshing, and yet, his excitement was short-lived. No matter how powerful the cohort had become and how well they had planned the battle, it was still not enough. By now, the tide of it was already shifting, their temporary success waning with each second. Sunny, Effie, and Kai had exhausted most of their essence. The Soul Serpent was mere moments away from losing its ability to assume the form of other shadows. Saint and Nightmare were faring better than the rest of them, but they, too, seemed to be slowing down, more and more injuries accumulating on the black body of the fearsome steed, its taciturn rider moving with visible strain. Much worse than that, the sorcerer's ship was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with Sun Prince. Guided by Cassie's hand, the vessel was still in one piece, but it was unclear how long she would be able to outrun death. Without her presence on the battlefield, the rate at which the enemy ships were being destroyed diminished drastically, and each had more freedom to move and attack. And the gargoyles were no more. Most of them were destroyed by the steel colossus, some were overpowered and shattered by the ascended warriors of the defending fleet. The few that remained were struggling, caught in enchanted chain nets and moments from being obliterated. The blood moon still shone with crimson radiance, as though the eclipse had no intention of ever ending, and there was no sign of Noctis. There was no sign of Solvane, too, which meant that the sorcerer was still alive, at least. The only indication that the two immortal transcendents were out there, somewhere, locked in a vicious fight, were the loud rattling of the heavenly chains and sudden quakes that run through one island after another. The islands swayed as pieces of them crumbled into the sky below. Hoping that Noctis would arrive and save them all like a god out of the machine was pointless. Hoping for anything was pointless, they were here to release hope from her shackles, after all, and not the other way around. The situation was about to turn really, really bad for the cohort, and there was no way Sunny could think of to change it. No problem. I'll just go and destroy 5 more ships, somehow. And then 5 more. Falling down, he dove into the shadows and stepped through them, wasting some of his last essence to appear on a different ship. Sunny might have been tired, but the battle went on. The world did not care about his exhaustion. It only cared about one thing. Sunny had to fight, or die. On a different vessel, Effie stared at the broken remains of the runic spear in her hand for a short moment, then let out an infuriated shout and bashed the attacking enemy with what was left of its shaft, using it as a club to shatter his leg. The dusk shard was growing heavy in her hand, and she had no essence left to spare to activate the indomitable enchantment and change its weight. Because of that, Effie was a split second too slow, and a sharp blade passed beneath the shield to slash her across the shoulder. This time, the blade did not bounce off the girl's skin, and instead sliced it apart. Drops of blood fell down to the slick deck. High above, Kai barely dodged an enemy arrow and reached toward his quiver, only to find it empty. Gritting his teeth, he dashed to the side, caught another arrow out of the air, then instantly knocked his on the string of his bow and sent it flying back at the archer, hitting the man in the eye. His essence was nearly gone, as well, and he had already lost too much blood to the blood arrow. Mundane ones were all he could use, and now, he had none left. A few moments later, the man in a charred wooden mask crashed into the deck of the ship a few steps away from Effie and spun, summoning a sharp saber. He was prepared to cover the young girl's back to his last breath, if need be. And some distance away, Cassie finally failed to dodge one of the monstrous javelins completely. It streaked across the deck of the graceful ship, turning the massive siege engine on its bow into a cloud of splinters, tearing out a part of the hull, and obliterating a dozen sailor dolls along with it. The young woman paled at the sounds of carnage, then hesitated for a few long moments. Then, a resolute expression appeared on her beautiful face. With a steady hand, she pushed one of the oars all the way down. Following her command, the ancient vessel abandoned the border between the two skies and started climbing up. Higher, higher, and then higher still. As if trying to reach the crimson moon itself. Chapter 722 Soul Reaver. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Landing on the deck of the enemy ship, Sunny swayed and caught himself, then stared somberly at the warriors of the Sun Legion, all of whom had already noticed his arrival. Following the command of the captain, the swordsmen advanced in a loose, but orderly formation. Behind them, the archers drew their bows and aimed them at the towering devil, their eyes shining with faith and resolve. They did not get a chance to shoot, however. A split second later, a ghastly abomination landed between them, its 6 front limbs and terrifying beak reaping half a dozen lives in an instant. This was Sunny's signal to move. He dashed toward the ranks of the advancing swordsmen, and at the same time, the Soul Serpent attacked them from behind. The two cut through the defenders of the ship and met in the middle of its deck. It was at that moment that the shadow finally exhausted the last of its essence. The abominable form of the Spire Messenger suddenly lost its shape and crumbled into a tide of darkness, which then rushed toward Sunny. A serpentine black Odachi then appeared in his hands. Sunny dismissed his other weapons, leaving only the great blade to keep him company. And roared. He was too low on essence to use any of their enchantments, anyway, but each kill of the Odachi was going to return a portion of it into his cores. More than that, the Soul Serpent was not the only one who reunited with Sunny. The haughty shadow had returned, as well, and had already wrapped itself around his body, alleviating some of his exhaustion and gifting him with its strength. Now, all Sunny had to do was fight and kill. With each of the enemies that fell, he was going to replenish more of his dwindling shadow essence, and that essence would then be used to kill more enemies and destroy more ships. As long as he continued to kill, he would not have to stop. Unless he was killed himself, of course. Soul Reaver was, indeed, an insidious ability. In a split second before the avalanche of enemies descended on him, Sunny glanced into the crimson sky. Out there, at a distance, the graceful ship was climbing high into the sky. Its hull was in shambles, with several sections of it shattered by the heavy bolts of the enemy ballistae. The powerful siege engine on its bow was gone, blown away by some terrible strike. There was a massive harpoon lodged in the vessel's side, with a piece of an enemy ship swinging below it on a thick chain. Barely any sailor dolls remained on the deck, most of them broken or destroyed. Seeing the pitiful state of the once majestic ship, Sunny couldn't help but grit his teeth. Then, he frowned. What the hell is she doing? Why was Cassie rising into the sky? Out there in the boundless vastness of the night, there was nothing to protect her from the ire of Sun Prince and the enemy ships. The winds were much stronger up there, and the air much thinner. It was very risky. However, Sunny had no time to think about it. The blind girl must have known what she was doing. Out of everyone he knew, he was confident in Cassie's foresight the most. She always had a reason. Throwing these thoughts out of his mind, Sunny strangled his worry for her and clashed with the first few of the enemies. He slashed down, splitting the opponent's helmet and skull with the sharp blade of the great Odachi, then slammed its hilt into another man's face, shook off the first corpse of the sword, and cut low, severing another enemy's leg. Then, Sunny grabbed the disoriented man whose face he had just crushed with one of his free hands and, using his body as a shield, barreled through the enemies, slashing left and right. The mantle of the underworld rang, withstanding several powerful blows. One of the strikes was especially dire. Something managed to cut through the onyx armor and bit deep into his flesh, making Sunny stumble and hiss. It was the captain of the vessel. The woman in bright armor stood among the slaughtered archers, her hands raised, two discs of sharp, blinding light forming on her palms. Cursing, Sunny threw the body of the still struggling enemy at the attacking legionnaires, and then bent down, picking up a stray bolt meant for the ship's ballistae. In the hand of the towering demon, the massive projectile almost looked like an oversized spear. Sending some of the newly received essence into his muscles, Sunny grunted, and then tossed the bolt with all his mind. The captain's eyes widened, but before she could even move, the improvised javelin struck her in the chest with the force of a siege ram, ending the woman's life immediately. You have slain and ascended. Sunny had no time to celebrate, because he was once again being attacked from all sides. The corner of his mouth twitched. She was an ascended, he slaughtered the remaining crew of the ship, then rammed it into another vessel and slaughtered its defenders, as well. By then, the mantle of the underworld was full of cracks and gaps, and his battered body beneath was full of holes. On the bright side, he had regained enough essence to freely activate the living stone enchantment of his armor, which allowed it to quickly recover from the damage and glistened darkly once again, its surface flawless and pristine. Sunny could not say the same about himself. Even though he had managed to recover some essence, his physical state was swiftly deteriorating. The countless shallow wounds were not too dangerous, especially because Blowweave refused to allow his blood to flow out of them. A couple of the more serious injuries he had received were not too bothersome for now, as well. However, his endurance was not limitless. Sunny was dead tired, and no amount of essence could fix that. He had only managed to last that long because of the blood blossom and the underworld armament, but even that was not enough to sustain him anymore. And the battle still raged on. Cassie had climbed so high into the sky that he could not even see her damaged ship anymore, taking most of what remained of the enemy fleet with her. The light of their lanterns turned into small dots that moved high above, resembling falling stars. From time to time, a piece of broken wood would fall from the darkness, reminding him that a fierce clash was still taking place up above. The pressure on the boarding parties reduced somewhat, but there were still a dozen ships left to stall them, or rather, hunt them down. Now that Sunny, his shadows, and his friends were tired and riddled with wounds, the roles they played subtly changed. He was not sure who was attacking whom anymore. But worse of all, with the distraction of Cassie's ship gone, the Steel Colossus once again resumed his search for Noctis. Sun Prince grabbed two of his gargantuan javelins, then bent slightly, and lunged forward. Gaining incredible speed, the giant leaped into the air, flew across a vast gap between two islands, and landed on the surface of a new one with a thunderous crash. This island was just one chain away from the Ivory City, with several tall pillars rising into the air to serve as mooring masts for the flying ships. Much more importantly, from it, the Colossus had a clear shot at the last place where Noctis and Sylvain had shown themselves, still locked in terrible combat. Sun Prince gazed into the crimson darkness, and then slowly raised his hand. Chapter 723 Falling Star. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Crap. The ship Sunny had just cleared happened to be very near to the island where Sun Prince was standing. In fact, all of the remaining ships were close to it due to the fact that the battle had gradually shifted closer to the Ivory City. He was not sure how much time it took and for how long he had been fighting. All he knew was how terribly tired he felt, and that we're on the verge of utter defeat. Looking at the steel colossus that was just beyond reach, Sunny gritted his teeth. The bastard was not allowed to throw that javelin, he had to be stopped at all cost. Noctis had to be protected. Not because Mordred told him so, but simply because the sorcerer was their best, and most likely only, chance to survive. Sunny hesitated for a split second, and then summoned Nightmare and Saint back. The shadows were entangled in a bloody battle on the deck of a distant ship. Following his command, the black steed did not waste a single moment to turn and leap into the dark sky. Landing on another vessel, it flew past the startled and terrified soldiers, then jumped again. Just like that, the stallion soon reached Sunny and stopped, his sides rising heavily, covered in terrible wounds. Bloody foam was falling from his mouth. The courser's eyes, however, were still full of unbreakable will and murderous resolve. He was a proud and stubborn creature, after all. Almost as stubborn as Sunny. Sunny offered him a pale smile. You did well, rest now, for a bit. Saint dismounted and stood motionlessly, looking at him with her usual calm composure. Her ruby eyes, however, seemed to have become a little dim. The taciturn knight's armor was cracked and battered, but she did not appear to be seriously injured. There was ruby dust streaming from the cracks, still. Sunny summoned the shadows embracing Nightmare and Saint back and then wrapped all four of them around his body. Below, the steel colossus had already taken aim and was prepared to make his throw. Before he could, however, a heavy bolt suddenly struck him in the neck. The giant lingered for a moment, then slowly turned his head. Standing at the bow of the ship, Sunny picked up another bolt and smiled grimly. He did not know how to load and aim a ballista, but his own strength was more than enough, or perhaps even greater than that of a siege weapon. Sure, his first throw did not seem to do any damage, it had to have been rather annoying, though. Augmented by the sonorous enchantment, the extraordinary rock boomed, spreading his voice far and wide. Hey, you! Shadow sends his regard. Come and get me, Rust Bucket, how's that hand feeling, by the way? Illuminated by the dim light of the crimson moon, the colossus shifted slightly. The shadows veiling his eyes grew deeper, and then, his javelin slowly moved, changing its aim. Sunny laughed. I guess he remembers me. Which was good. What was bad was that Sunny did not really know how to steer a flying ship, and so, he currently was a stationary target. A sitting duck, basically. With a shrug, he dismissed his shadows and tossed the second bolt at the giant, then looked in satisfaction as it bounced fruitlessly of the Chain Lord's stoic face. My aim did improve, huh? Just one more throw, and it would time for him to abandon ship. Sun Prince lowered his head, and then suddenly lashed out, moving with stunning speed for a creature of his size. It was as though he was trying to kill an irritating fly. Sunny's smile froze. He had not expected that fast of a reaction at all. A split second before the javelin hit the ship, a hand grabbed him from behind, and Sunny felt himself moving. Then, something exploded below him, and everything was momentarily enveloped in a cloud of splinters. Kai, who was holding him as he tried to fly up, grunted. Heavy. In the next moment, they were hit by the shockwave, and the archer lost his hold of the four-armed demon. Together, they plummeted down. Effie was there, too, clinging to Kai's back and holding for her dear life. The two seemed riddled with wounds, but still alive. Sunny felt the world spin for a couple of seconds, then shook of his disorientation, summoned the Dark Wing, and tried to slow down his fall. They landed on the surface of the island and instantly moved, dodging the debris of the destroyed ship. All three somehow managed to avoid being crushed. Then, however, the ground beneath them suddenly shook. Feeling a sickening emptiness in his chest, Sonny slowly turned his head and saw the towering mountain of steel walking toward them, the island quaking with each of the giant steps. The nightmarish memory of being smashed like a bug by Sun Prince's soul flashed in front of his eyes once again, making Sonny flinch and back away. There was nowhere they could run, however. And more importantly, they still needed to draw Sun Prince away from Noctis. But what could they do but die, faced with the fury of an immortal transcendent? Sonny paled. Think. He raised his Odachi with uncertainty, desperately trying to evaluate their chances. He still had some essence left, enough for a few minutes of remaining a shadow, or making a jump or two. Would that be enough? What of the others? And what was he going to do when his essence run out? Then, a sudden sound attracted his attention. Looking up, Sonny saw something that made his eyes widen. Far above, in the dark red sky, a silhouette of graceful ship appeared from the radiance of the moon. Battered and damaged, the ship was flying, almost falling, down. It had been descending from terrible heights, and so, gathered such staggering momentum that the winds screamed loudly as they were being cut by the bow of the plummeting vessel. This was the sound Sonny had heard. He could almost see a delicate silhouette standing at the stern, holding the oars in her hands. Cassie. Falling from the sky like a star, the battered ship changed its course slightly. And then rammed into the giant steel colossus at full speed, causing the whole world to tremble. Chapter 724 Weight of Regret. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The battered ship fell from the dim red darkness of the sky and, illuminated by the eerie radiance of the crimson moon, crashed into the towering steel colossus. The armored beak of the ship's ram struck the giant's chest with such tremendous force that there was a blinding flash of light, and then a powerful shockwave rolled across the island, violently throwing Sonny off his feet. The deafening roar of the impact came as he fell. Rolling on the ground, Sonny was assaulted by the thundering clash of the blast, the rumbling groan of shattering wood, and the booming shriek of heavy metal being ripped apart. Stunned and disoriented, he rose to his knees, then swayed a little and looked up. What he saw made him pale. The sorcerer's ship lay broken on the ground. The fluid lines of its graceful hull were broken and gaped with terrible breaches, wide cracks running through the ancient wood. Its bow was completely shattered, and the damage in the front part of the vessel was especially severe. The beautiful tree growing around its main mast seemed damaged and dead. Cassie was nowhere in sight. At the very edge of the island, thrown back, Sun Prince knelt. The steel colossus was swaying dangerously, clutching at his face with his one remaining hand. At the spot where the ram of the ship had struck, his chest was caved in and ripped open, rivers of molten metal flowing from the terrible wound. And in the depths of the wound, turned incandescent by the heat, a cage made in the form of a human figure was revealed. The cage was slightly broken, too, and a charred hand could be seen clawing at the edges. Under its fingers, the metal was bending like cloth, slowly being torn away. Sonny shuddered, and then turned his gaze back to the wreck of the flying ship. Cassie, where's Cassie? He could not see the blind young woman anywhere in the wreckage. However, Sonny saw someone else. A bloodied figure suddenly fell from above, bounced off the ground, and crashed into the hull of the ship, causing more cracks to appear on its surface. Raven black hair, pale skin, it was Noctis. The sorcerer did not look good. His whole body was covered in blood, terrible wounds gaping open here and there. His beautiful face was broken and disfigured, the skin split open and white bone visible beneath, with one eye socket empty and full of darkness. He was still alive, though, of course, he was. Noctis could not escape from the pain into the merciful embrace of death even if he wanted to. As Sonny watched, paralyzed for a moment, something flashed through the air, and a graceful figure appeared for a split second in front of the sorcerer, her beautiful chestnut hair dancing in the wind. In the next moment, a large portion of the hull of the ship exploded as Noctis was pushed through it by a vicious strike. Both saints disappeared into the darkness of the ancient vessel, which then shuddered, hinting that their dreadful battle continued. Sunny froze, looking between the swaying colossus and the wreckage of the ancient ship. His mind was empty, and he did not know what to do. Or rather, he could not decide what took priority. There was not much time to decide, however. Gritting his teeth, he looked around, searching for his friends. Kai seemed to be knocked out by the blast a little, but Effie was already on her feet, staring in the same direction as he. There was a grim expression on her face. Sunny groaned, then slowly stood up. Effie, any ideas? She hesitated for a moment, then flashed him a pale smile. I guess it's this time. He frowned. What time? The young girl glanced at the wreckage, and then said wistfully. You know, that time when, in the movies, someone says to split up. Sunny stared at her, not entirely understanding what she meant. Effie's gaze slowly shifted to the kneeling colossus and, in a steady voice, she said. Give me the knife, the ruby one. I'll deal with the big bastard. You and Kai go and find Cassie, then help the lunatic, in that order. He's not going to die anytime soon, anyway. He stared at her from above, deep shadows veiling his eyes. Sunny had a lot to say, but in the end, he simply asked. Are you sure? The young girl laughed. Don't I look like I'm sure? Relax, doofus, it's just an immortal transcendent. We better deal with that thing before it escapes the cage, anyway. Sunny gritted his teeth, then summoned the covetous coffer and handed Effie the knife that they had gotten from the creature in the lake. There was no time to say anything else, and no need to. Effie took the knife, gripped his wrist for a moment, and then dashed away without looking back. Sunny helped Kai stand up and, supporting the disoriented archer, hurried toward the wreckage of the crashed ship. As they ran, an ugly expression appeared on his bestial face. Don't you die on me, you freeloader, your sleeping pod is still in my house, damn it. Do you even how much hassle it is to properly dispose of a corpse? If you have any conscience, you will stay alive. Behind him, Effie ran to the edge of the island, summoning the dusk shard. As the swirl of sparks surrounded her hand, she jumped up and landed on a toppled pillar that lay parallel to the ground, rising slightly at the far end. The young girl rushed across the long pillar and then leaped high into the air with all her prodigious strength, flying straight toward the kneeling giant's chest. As she flew, Effie activated the single enchantment of the heavy shield. Forged from a shard of a fallen star, this shield contains the weight of the heavens. Depending on the heart of its wielder, it can be light as a feather or heavy as regret. She poured her essence into the memory, making it feel as heavy as a mountain on her hand. A moment later, Effie crashed into the colossus with all that weight. The impact was not nearly as devastating as when Cassie had brought her ship down from the sky. But since Sun Prince was yet to regain his balance, it was just enough to push his upper body a little bit back, and that little bit was enough to send Sun Prince toppling over. A few seconds later, both of them, the giant immortal and the little girl, disappeared from view, falling over the edge of the island. Down into the empty darkness of the sky below. Chapter 725 Shipwreckless Land. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As Sunny and Kai moved toward the wreck of the ancient ship, the heavenly chains suddenly rattled deafeningly, and the whole island quaked once more as it shifted higher. Turning back, they saw that the steel colossus was gone from the edge. Effie was nowhere in sight, as well. Sunny stared at the empty space where the giant had been kneeling not too long ago, then gritted his teeth and looked away. Effie knew what she was doing. No one was more motivated to survive the nightmare and return to the waking world alive. Not even Sunny. She would not have done anything that would leave her no chance to escape. In any case, every one of them was in terrible danger. If Sylvain managed to defeat Noctis, she would be coming for them next. And Cassie could have been dying or dead already, somewhere in the wreckage. Noel de M. There was no time to waste on unnecessary thoughts. Sunny dragged Kai forward, lamenting the fact that the archer was coming back to his senses so slowly. His incredible sight would have been very useful right about now. His 4 shadows flew toward the wreck, gliding between the debris in search of the young woman. However, it was hard to make out anything in the chaotic mess of splintered wood, upturned soil, and shredded sails. And then, finally, he thought that he noticed weak movement under a pile of debris. With his 2 hearts beating wildly, Sunny rushed forward, then threw a piece of the ship's hull aside and bent down, digging through the soil. Soon, he saw a piece of black fabric, and then removed some more dirt to reveal Cassie's pale face. She struggled to sit, and then coughed violently. The blind young woman seemed to be fine. The piece of cloth covering her eyes had slid down, revealing 2 empty eye sockets, and her dress was soaked with blood from the arrow wound on her shoulder, but other than that, there were only mild scratches and lacerations on her body. Miraculously, Cassie was alive. Sunny stared at her with wide eyes, a sense of profound relief slowly spreading through his chest. The young woman coughed some more, wiped the dirt off her face, then turned her head slightly with an uncertain and vulnerable expression. Who is there? Sunny. He helped Kai sit down, then said. Yes, it's me. But can't your ability tell? Cassie grimaced. I've run out of soul essence. Damnation. A stifled laugh escaped from his mouth. That's what you are concerned with. You damned fool, what the hell was that stunt? How did you even survive the crash? Cassie turned to him with a confused expression on her beautiful face. How did I, what? I jumped off the ship a few moments before it hit the prince, of course. Dancer carried me down. I am not crazy. He stared at her for a moment, then covered his face with a hand and let out a long, relieved sigh. You've been spending too much time with me. Only a madman would call ramming a flying ship into an immortal steel giant at full speed not crazy. Now that he knew that the blind girl was alive, though, he could finally think about everything else. As cold shivers run down his spine, Sunny turned and stared at the dark gaping hole in the hull of the crashed ship where Noctis and Sylvain had disappeared. The wreckage was still trembling and groaning, proving that the 2 transcendents were still fighting inside. Cassie tried to stand up, fell back, then remained motionless for a few moments. What is happening? Sunny grimaced. Effie is dealing with what is left of Sun Prince. Kai is here, but he had the wind knocked out of him. Noctis is also on the island. He seems to be losing to Sylvain terribly. His shadows returned, wrapping themselves around his body and bringing with them vast and fearsome strength. Sunny lingered for a moment, and then stood up. You stay here with Kai and rest for a bit. I'll be back shortly. The blind young woman frowned, then hurriedly fumbled for her blindfold and pulled it up, covering the empty darkness of her missing eyes. Where are you going? He looked at the wreckage for a few moments, and then smiled darkly. I am just going to return a debt. He owed Sylvain quite a lot, after all. Months of agony and desperation, the life of a dear friend, and even a heart. When would he get a chance to repay her hospitality again? Leaving Cassie and Kai behind, Sunny gathered his courage, and dashed toward the wreck. Jumping through the breach in the hull, he landed on the skewed floor of one of the compartments at the stern of the ship and froze for a moment, hit by a strong sense of déjà vu. All of this, did it not feel very familiar? Was it not the same compartment he had entered the wreck through all that time ago, in the distant future, while hunting for miraculous coins? Of course, back then, the ancient ship had looked vastly different, at least on the inside. It had been infested by a sprawling mass of brown vines and moss, the murky air full of poison they secreted. Back then, Sunny had not known who Noctis was, and how his ship had ended up broken and abandoned on a desolate island near the rift. Well, now everything fell in its place. This island was going to become the Shipwreck Island. The wound in the chest of the giant steel corpse, the terrible damage done to the bow of the crashed vessel, it all made sense now, except for one thing. How would Sylvain end up trapped for thousands of years in the cargo hold, so that Sunny could kill her in the future? Sunny did not consider his chances in a battle against the living embodiment of war to be very high, but the mere fact of knowing the future told him that it was not impossible to defeat her. At least that was what he wanted to believe, sneaking through the broken ship as he came closer and closer to the sounds of the furious battle. If he was wrong, however, the possibility of Sunny himself becoming the host of a monstrous corrupted parasite was not out of the question. Chapter 726 Sweet Release. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As Sunny slowly approached the main cargo hold, he felt doubt crawl into his mind. What was he actually doing? A battle between two saints was no place for an awakened, no matter how powerful he had grown after absorbing thousands of shadow fragments and forming the fourth core. The gap in power between Sunny and Sylvain was just too vast. He had faced her twice in the past, and each time, the War Maiden crushed him without even putting any effort into her attacks. The bitter taste of those defeats still lingered in his mouth. Especially of the second one, when he watched helplessly as she slaughtered Ilias in front of his eyes. When he remembered that vile day, his pupils narrowed. An overwhelming feeling of hatred and anger drowned his mind, so scorching and consuming that Sunny was momentarily stunned by the intensity of it. Every wound, every second of torturous pain, every night of quiet desperation he had experienced in the Red Colosseum rose from the depths of his memory, making him feel as if he was reliving all that torment. The memory of the burning sacred grove was there, too, as well as that of an old man crying as he cradled the dead body of his mother in his trembling arms. And that of Ilias's bright eyes suddenly turning empty and hollow. The grief, shame, and fury of not having been able to keep his promise and save the young man. Sunny tried to resist the hatred, but failed. It was just too vast, deep, and deserved. Sylvain had deserved his hatred. She put him in a cage. She tried to make him a slave. Gritting his teeth and suppressing a bestial growl, Sunny continued to move forward. I'll make her pay. It is not impossible. His task was not as hard as he had made it to be. He did not need to defeat Sylvain, he just needed to give Noctis an opportunity to defeat her. Anyone could be defeated, anyone could be destroyed. You just had to use the right weapon. Even the gods had not been able to save themselves. Sunny's enemy was an immortal transcendent, but his weapon was an immortal transcendent, too. Approaching a familiar door, he summoned the cruel sight, inhaled deeply, and then turned into an incorporeal shadow, sliding noiselessly into the main cargo hold of the broken ship. There, two saints were entangled in a vicious battle. Both Noctis and Sylvain seemed to have foregone the use of weapons. Neither had they assumed their transformed forms, preferring to remain in the shape of humans. They were not even using their aspect abilities, unless Sunny simply failed to comprehend the scope and magnitude of what the Transcendents were doing. Instead, the Immortals chose the most direct, intimate, and brutal form of combat. They were fighting with their bare hands. Each strike was devastating enough to crush a mountain, sending destructive shockwaves through the vast cargo hold. And Noctis seemed to be losing terribly. Up close, the sorcerer looked even worse than when Sunny had caught a glimpse of him outside of the ship. He was covered in blood from head to toe, his face broken and missing an eye. One of his cheeks was ripped open, revealing white teeth and making it seem as though Noctis was grinning. The sight of it was both ghastly and disturbing. Noctis looked more like a corpse than a living being. And yet, he was still moving. The speed at which the two saints fought was almost too great for Sunny to discern anything, but he could still perceive the sorcerer deflecting some of Sylvain's vicious blows and trying to dodge others. Sometimes, he even succeeded. But mostly, he failed. With each strike that landed on his body, more blood was spilled, more bones were broken with a sickening crunch, and more of what made Noctis himself was destroyed. There was almost nothing left of the beautiful and charming person Sunny had once seen on the surface of a golden coin. Sylvain, on the other hand, seemed perfectly fine. Her tantalizing face was calm and slightly sad, her soft skin free of any blemishes, her simple red tunic flawlessly clean. The only indication that she had been locked in a furious fight with another transcended was that her hands were covered in scarlet blood, becoming of the same color as her garment. His thoughts darkened. Damnation. Sunny hid in the shadows, watching tensely and waiting for his chance to interfere. There had to be a chance, a single instance where a momentary delay in Sylvain's onslaught would allow Noctis to turn the tables on the War Maiden. L.RG. But no matter how long he waited and how closely he watched, the moment never came. Instead, after another blow, Noctis let out a terrible scream and fell to his knees, blood streaming from his mouth. Sylvain calmly stepped forward and grabbed him by the hair, jerking the sorcerer's head up so that his mangled face could be seen. With a solemn expression, she raised her bloodied fist to deliver the final blow and said in a voice that seemed to be more mournful than triumphant. "Is this all? I expected more from you, Noctis. I wished for so much more." As Sunny cursed and prepared to attack the War Maiden from behind, the sorcerer struggled weakly in her grip. His gaze danced wildly across the cargo hold, as if searching for something to save him. And then, for a short moment, it landed directly at Sunny, making him freeze. Did he imagine it? It seemed as though Noctis looked at him with purpose. It was just a split second, but Sunny was ready to swear that he noticed a silent message in the sorcerer's one remaining eye. "Don't." And that he saw something moving beneath the immortal's skin. Sunny only hesitated for a heartbeat, but by then, it was already too late to do anything. Sylvain struck, breaking Noctis's ribcage and thrusting her hand into his chest. But then, the War Maiden suddenly flinched and jumped back, letting out a quiet yelp. Her bloodied hand was pressed tightly against her body. Noctis, meanwhile, continued to kneel, staring expressionlessly at his broken chest. Then, he shifted slightly and let out a long, deep sigh of relief. "Ah, this is so much better, so much easier." He looked up, his ghastly grin slowly turning into a sincere one. "This was almost worth ruining my attire." Chapter 727 Unforgiven. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Suddenly, Noctis seemed different. He was still beaten, mangled, and covered in blood, but the sorcerer's presence subtly changed. If before it was faint and weakening, now, it became brimming with power, potency, and free-flowing energy. Vast, furious, unrestrained. And suffused with madness. Despite the fact that Noctis was on his knees and crippled, he suddenly seemed terrifying. The morbid grin on his torn and disfigured face seemed more menacing than pitiful now. His one remaining eye glistened, reflecting the distant light of the crimson moon. It was as though something that had been suppressing the sorcerer's true power all this time finally set him free. Noctis inhaled deeply, and at the same, Sylvain suddenly swayed. The hand she had used to crush his ribcage was still pressed against her body, blood streaming down on the red tunic. Her beautiful eyes widened. And then, something moved under her skin, making the War Maiden let out a pained scream. She staggered back and looked at the kneeling sorcerer with a pale face. What have you done to me?" Noctis smiled. His voice sounded hoarse and full of unfathomable emotion when he spoke. "What else? I have fulfilled your most ardent wish, Sylvain. I have defeated you." She stared at him in shock, then suddenly shuddered and let out another tortured scream. As drops of blood flew out of her mouth, the beautiful transcendent stumbled and fell to her knees. Her sublime face was deathly pale and contorted by a grimace of terrible pain. The sorcerer let out a croaking laugh and slowly stood up. Just like that, their roles were reversed. The War Maiden was on her knees, and Noctis was looming above her. He lingered for a moment, and then looked at the patch of shadows where Sunny was hiding, his mind full of vague suspicion. "You can come out, Sunless. It's safe now." "What the hell?" Sunny hesitated for a few seconds, then assumed his corporeal form and glanced at Sylvain, his eyes burning with hatred. Slowly, a few things were clicking in place and starting to make sense. The magical circle in the sorcerer's residence, the river of blood that Noctis had fed to the soil below, the cracks on the stone floor, the tremors that had been running through it from time to time. Even the faint scream that had awoken Sunny on his last night in the sanctuary. He turned and stared at the sorcerer, a harrowing guess appearing in his mind. Sylvain, however, was still in the dark. As the ghastly movement under her skin grew stronger and more noticeable, she groaned. "What is this thing? My aspect." Noctis smiled. "Ah, you've noticed. Yes, there is no point in trying to summon your abilities. My little pet is a bit hungry for soul essence, you see. I've been starving it for a few hundred years, after all." As he spoke, his own essence flowed freely, coursing through his mangled body. The terrible wounds covering it started to heal at an incredible pace. As Sunny watched, the bloody hole in the sorcerer's chest closed, his shattered ribs coalescing back into proper shape. His torn cheek was already growing back together. A clot of blood formed in his empty eye socket, slowly turning into a new eye. Noctis took a step forward, leaned forward, and looked at Sylvain. Then, he whispered. "This pet of mine is a very special creature, it is a vine that feeds on powerful souls. The profane seed that eventually birthed it was created when the ashes of the Heart Grove mixed with Ader's blood. You remember Ader, don't you, Sylvain? Well, allow me to return her last gift to you." His voice seethed with boundless rage and sorrow. Sunny frowned, then glanced at the sorcerer with a complicated expression. So, Noctis had created Wormvine, a corrupted monster capable of devouring saints, from the ashes of the sacred grove and Ader's blood. He had kept it in the ground beneath his residence for hundreds of years, nurturing the abomination by feeding it his essence and blood. And then, when the time came, he took it into himself, making his body both the bait and the trap for the person who had desecrated the grove and killed its lady. All this time, the sorcerer was restrained by having to suppress the creature and prevent it from devouring him from the inside. And when the monster finally found a new host, he was finally free to exert his full power. A pale smile appeared on Sunny's face. What a devious, patient, and ruthless vengeance Noctis had envisioned for Sylvain. He could learn a thing or two from the unforgiving sorcerer. The War Maiden looked at Noctis for a few moments, then bent in a violent convulsion, letting out a terrible shriek. The skin on her face broke, and a thin, worm-like vine appeared from beneath it, crawling forward through the blood. Another, thicker one, burst from her hand. Sylvain groaned, then let out a stifled chuckle. "Ah, after all this time. I am defeated, by you." He gritted her teeth, and then suddenly smiled through the pain. "Glory to the beast." With that, the War Maiden struggled to move, and arduously reached forward with a trembling hand. A knife carved out of a single piece of wood rested on her bloodied palm. Noctis looked at her for a while, then silently took the knife and straightened, towering above the trembling, suffering woman. He remained motionless for a few moments, darkness veiling his face. Sunny took a step forward, being strangled by hatred. "No, no, not yet. Let her scream. Let her suffer more. Let her suffer forever." Killing Sylvain was what they had planned, but now, looking at the beautiful, hateful priestess of war, he was unwilling to let her escape that easily. She had wanted this to happen all along. This was her true victory. Sunny's ability to think clearly dissolved, consumed by fury. He had just enough of sense left to realize that this behavior was unnatural, that the intensity of his desire for revenge was unusual, even for someone as spiteful as him, but he did not care. At that moment, the only thing he wanted was to see Sylvain pay for what she had taken from him. Noctis looked at the knife, his eyes full of darkness. And then threw it aside, lodging the wooden blade into the wall of the cargo hold. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. "You don't deserve to die. For what you did to us, you don't deserve to die, Sylvain. You only deserve to live." Chapter 728 Spiteful Shadow. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Hearing the cruel words that sentenced Sylvain to thousands of years of harrowing torment, Sunny couldn't help but feel a dark, euphoric sense of glee. The memory of pain she had visited upon him and the faces of those she had killed flashed in front of his eyes once again, making that glee grow even sweeter. Good, good. The only thing Sunny regretted was that he had killed Sylvain in the distant future, releasing her from that torment. If he had known better back then, he would have left her to rot. Noctis coldly stared at the squirming priestess for a moment, and then turned around, as if intending to leave. Sylvain let out a groan of agony, more vines breaking through her skin and crawling down to the floor. Wait. She struggled to raise her head and look up, her eyes full of fear. Noctis, you have to kill me. You won't be able to free her, if I am alive. The sorcerer stopped, lingered for a moment, and then glanced at her over the shoulder. His face was cold and unmoving. After a long pause, he said nonchalantly. Hope is a great, powerful demon. She can handle a shackle or two on her own. As Sylvain's eyes widened, Noctis looked away and took a step toward the gates of the hold. And Sunny, meanwhile, was doing the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. Sunny was walking toward the edge of the cargo hold, where the wooden knife was lodged into the wall. Every step he made felt as if he was dragging a mountain with him. No, it was much harder than that. A mountain would have been heavy, but dragging it along was a simple task. Hard, or maybe even impossible, but simple nevertheless. However, he was not struggling against physical weight. Instead, Sunny was struggling against his very nature. He had grown up in the outskirts, fighting for his life in a cruel, indifferent world. He had to learn a lot of vicious lessons to survive. Those lessons made him selfish, cynical, and jaded, unwilling to trust anyone or believe in anything. Those qualities had helped him to remain alive, but as his life changed, some of them turned into a hindrance. Slowly and painfully, he had shed his previous skin and learned new things. He learned to trust those who deserve to be trusted, and have hope in himself and the future. However, one thing he never managed to leave behind, and did not really want to, was his spite. Spite had been the only thing that motivated him to survive the first nightmare, after all. Back then, and maybe even now, it was his only reason to live. And so, Sunny was not big on forgiveness. He could not even forgive Cassie, at least not fully, despite everything that they had been through together before and after her decision to put Neff's life before his own. He believed in the value of retribution. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that was the ancient law. No one should be able to trample on him and remain unpunished. That was why the very thought of letting Sylvain die in peace seemed abhorrent to him. And yet, his trembling hand landed on the handle of the wooden knife. Sunny was a very stubborn person. Gritting his teeth, he dislodged the knife from the wall and swayed a little, struggling to keep the all-consuming hatred that drowned his mind at bay. Yes, he wanted Sylvain to pay, he wanted her to suffer. But, even more than that, he wanted fate to go to hell. He could not allow for another thing to happen just like it had happened in the real past. He needed to prove, once and for all, that he was not a marionette that hung powerlessly from the strings of fate, able only to dance to a predetermined tune. He was also really outraged at the thought of hope messing with his mind. And this was where the scorching intensity of his hatred for the War Maiden had come from, without a doubt, from the poisonous influence of the demon of desire, who had taken his trauma, sorrow, and anger, and turned it into a weapon to subjugate him. It was a weird thing, to know that his fury was fabricated, but at the same time welcome it and be tempted to surrender to it. And that temptation, it was way harder to overcome than the weight of a mountain. Why am I even doing this? She deserves to suffer. Wouldn't it be splendid to leave her to suffer? Wouldn't it be the most joyous thing ever? Oh, it would. I can't imagine anything sweeter. Sunny struggled to even remember why he was holding the knife. Oh, right, fate. I did promise to destroy it, didn't I? That was because my fate is to be a slave. I don't really want to be a slave, but who cares? I want Sylvain to be tortured for eternity much more than I want to be free. Freedom is distant and abstract. Who even wants it? But retribution, it's right here, and feels so wonderful. Gritting his teeth, he made a step forward. Step. Step. Another step. Walking across the cargo hold of the broken ship was much harder than it had been to climb a cold, dark mountain in chains. He wasn't sure that he was going to make it. His face was contorted by an ugly grimace, and his dark eyes burned with mad glee. Then, Sunny stopped. I change my mind. It is worth it. Surrendering to fate is worth it, if it means that this hateful witch will be tortured endlessly. This will be right, this will be just, this will be the best outcome of all. Sunny sighed, and smiled with relief. Now that he decided to surrender to fate, it was as though a terrible weight was lifted from his shoulders. He was free to bask in the joy of revenge, revel in it. He was unburdened, ecstatic, and at peace. Sunny smiled, and thrust the wooden knife into Sylvain's chest. Damnation. Yes, leaving the war maiden to suffer felt right and just. But Sunny had never been righteous, and did not really care about being just. And more importantly than that, he wanted to spite fate much more than he wanted to avenge himself on Sylvain. The beautiful priestess shuddered and looked at him with pain and relief mixing in her mesmerizing eyes. Then, her gaze slowly turned empty, losing the spark of life, and her body fell to the floor. Sunny grimaced, feeling bitterly disappointed. He was not happy with his choice at all. He felt terrible. But it had to be done. As the wooden knife broke in his hand, the spell whispered. You have slain a transcendent human, Sylvain. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. He blinked. Another memory. How does it even work? And then, Sunny suddenly felt really uncomfortable. As if someone was staring at his back. He turned around slowly and met the sorcerer's dark gaze. Noctis looked at him, and then bared his teeth in a dangerous smile. Sunless, what did you do? Sunny shivered, suddenly feeling very cold. Crap. Chapter 729 Broken Shackles. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Noctis stood in the darkness of the cargo hold, looking at Sunny with a dangerous, cold smile. One of his eyes glinted with pale moonlight, the other, still suffused with blood, with a mad red glow. The air around them became cold, the darkness grew deeper. Sunny trembled a little, then glanced at the broken wooden knife in his hand. Now that the tool created by the Lord of Light had served its purpose, it was empty and mundane, the ocean of radiant energy and the string of fate long gone from within it. He dropped the remains of the knife on the floor, glanced at the sorcerer with a dour expression, and said nonchalantly. I killed her. Why? Noctis stared at him for a few moments, then took a deep breath. I've been planning and waiting for this moment for a very long time, you know. Hundreds of years, really. And you just went and ruined it all. Sunless, we are friends, but I'll be honest. I am a little bit cross right now. Something shifted in the darkness, and the walls of the cargo hold groaned. The sorcerer continued to stare at him, his red eye glowing brighter and brighter. Sunny himself winced, feeling the sorcerer's presence crash into him like a wave. Then, he pretended to look unimpressed, took a step forward, and shrugged. Well, get over yourself. Noctis blinked. Then, he tilted his head a little. Then, he stopped smiling. Get over myself. It did not seem like he liked that answer at all. Sunny nodded. Yeah. Snap out of it and get over yourself. He pointed at the body of Sylvain and frowned. Be calm, first of all, do me a favor and remember why we started all this mess in the first place. It was to kill the Chain Lords and free Hope. Oh, look. A dead Chain Lord. Isn't it wonderful? He smiled, revealing his sharp fangs. However, Noctis remained unmoved, still staring at him with a frightening coldness. Sunny took another step forward and pointed a finger at his chest. Second of all, aren't you too full of yourself? Ader's last gift, really. He judged that if there was a moment when the Transcendent would simply kill him with one strike, it would have been now. So, despite the smile, Sunny was actually trembling inside. Nox gritted his teeth. What's wrong with that? Sunny crossed his arms. Who are you to deliver gifts on her behalf? Unlike the two of us, Lady Ader had no hatred for Sylvain. In fact, she was grateful to her. She swore to carry that debt of gratitude to the Shadow Realm, even. I saw it all in one of the nightmares you had sent me into. The corner of the sorcerer's twitched. You are lying. Why would she? Sunny shook his head. I never lie. Lady Ader was the first of the Eternal Shackles to question your duty, wasn't she? She came to the conclusion that Hope should be liberated, and that was where you got that idea. From her. He sighed. Well, who has done more to make it happen than Sylvain? Without her, Hope's prison would still have been perfect. The Chain Lords wouldn't have been driven to desperation and madness. And we wouldn't be standing here, trying to break the chains that bind desire. Sunny grimaced and looked away, still in the throes of crushing regret about gifting Sylvain an easy death. So, as much as it pains me to admit, in a sense, Sylvain is the true architect of this rebellion. She made Lady Ader's desire come true. And although I would have loved to let her suffer for an eternity, our task comes first. Noctis remained motionless for a while, staring into the distance. The mad light in his eyes seemed to subside a little. Then, he shifted slightly and glanced at Sunny. His voice sounded grim. Did I suggest you run, Sunless? Sunny froze. Crap. It didn't work. He took a step back and shuddered, staring at the sorcerer with fear. Noctis, wait. What I meant to say was. The sorcerer shook his head. No, you idiot. I'm not going to kill you. But have you stopped to think what would happen if Sylvain dies? Sunny raised his eyebrows. I was a bit preoccupied. Wait, what? Noctis glanced at the body of the War Maiden and backed away, too. The worm vine, it doesn't have a host anymore, you foolish shadow. So, run. Some distance away, at the edge of the island, a small hand appeared from the darkness. A young girl in battered armor struggled to grab something, then pulled herself up, fell on the grass, and remained motionless, staring at the dark sky. Her small body was covered in burns and lacerations, the bronze armor shredded so thoroughly that it was falling apart, slowly turning into dimming sparks of light. She was severely wounded, drained of essence, and exhausted. But she was alive. Effie stared at the stars, too tired to move. Feeling pain course through her badly burnt body, she winced slightly, and then whispered quietly. Oh. You should have seen the other guy. A pale smile appeared on her bloodied face. Far below, a giant steel carcass was swaying in the wind, its leg tangled in a heavenly chain that the Colossus had broken as he fell. His chest was split open, and deep within it, a half-open cage in the form of a human figure was slowly turning cold. Sun Prince was dead, as well. Now, only 2 Chain Lords remained. Sunny and Noctis left the cargo hold of the ancient ship in a hurry, barely escaping the worm wine. Behind them, the brown vines were already crawling across the floor, growing in size with each second, hungry to find a source of soul essence to devour. Noctis did not seem too enthusiastic about the prospect of fighting his own creation, and neither was Sunny. The last time, he had destroyed the corrupted monster by killing its host, but this time, he himself ran the risk of becoming the host. It was better to retreat and choose their battle wisely. Very soon, they climbed on the hull of the broken vessel and lingered there for a few moments, looking up. Above them, the remaining ships of the defending fleet hovered in the air, for some reason reluctant to approach and continue their relentless onslaught. There were still around 40 ships left, but, perhaps stunned by the death of their commanders or afraid of the sorcerer, the enemies remained in place. Then, as if following an order, the ships turned and flew back, toward the Ivory City. Sunny frowned. They are retreating. He glanced at Noctis, unsure of what was happening. The sorcerer stared at the sky for a few more moments, and then sighed. Well. I have good news and bad news. Sunny did not like the sound of it at all. What is it? Noctis smiled. The good news is that the eclipse is ending. And indeed, as soon as he said it, the crimson hue of the night sky changed. Looking up, Sunny saw that the shadow was leaving the surface of the moon, which was returning to its usual silver color. Its position, though. Suddenly, he felt a very, very bad premonition. What's the bad news? Noctis silently pointed east. Turning around, Sunny saw a line of pale lilac painting the sky above the horizon as the edge of the sun slowly appeared from the darkness of the sky below. The sorcerer grinned. The night is over. It's a new day. Chapter 730 Dying Wish. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunny watched the sun appear over the eastern horizon, his heart's growing cold. His vertical pupils narrowed, and his fists clenched. The night was over. Had it been that long, already? He had lost the track of time during the vicious battle in the skies, but it seemed as though their desperate assault on the flying fleet had only taken a second. But in reality, of course, it had not. He slowly turned to Noctis, whose battered face had almost healed and was now calm and carefree again. The sorcerer was looking at the sky with a strangely neutral expression. Remind me, wasn't the plan to defeat Severax before dawn, when he was devoid of his vast and terrifying powers? The immortal sighed. Well, it's good to have a plan. However, plans rarely go as you want them to go. Sunny gritted his teeth. So, what happens now? How are you going to deal with the dragon? Noctis shrugged. He must be really, really angry right now. After all, we just killed his brother, the only person Severus still cares about in this world. Congratulations, by the way. I really did not expect you. Sunny interrupted him with a low growl. Get to the point. Now that the sun is rising, your powers will be diminished, while his will reach their peak. How are we going to survive? The sorcerer remained silent for a few moments, then scratched the back of his head. We'll come up with something. Sunny stared at him in disbelief. You are joking, right? Come on, you must have some devious trick up your sleeve. You have an incredible advantage, after all. You have the knife that can make him mortal, while he doesn't have yours. Should I give you the knives? You have never asked me for the damned knives. Wasn't that the reason you befriended me, in the first place? Noctis looked at him for a while, then simply shook his head. No. No, that was not the reason, Sunless. In any case, giving me the knife won't do much good. I will still have to defeat Severus, whether he becomes mortal or not. Either I subdue him and we can use the knife to finish the job, or he subdues me, and then there's no point. And I really don't have any tricks left. He smiled, and then added wistfully. Except one. Sunny exhaled with relief. Finally. What is it? The sorcerer turned to him with a smile. Why, it's you, Sunless. Of course. Did I not say that fate brought us together for a reason? Sunny stared at him, his expression slowly turning dark. You did, but what the hell do you mean? Noctis looked away, at the beautiful silhouette of the flying city. After a few moments, he said. No matter how my battle with Severus goes, it will end near the ivory tower. One of us will fall, maybe it will be him, and maybe it will be me. However, that doesn't matter. He sighed, and then glanced at Sunny. As long as one of us dies, there will be only one chain left. It won't hold hope for long. So, Sunless, my dear friend. Noctis lingered for a moment, and then smiled. Should I lose? I want you to kill me. That is my desire. The sorcerer looked at him, the smile disappearing from his face. Then, he said softly. That is the fate I spoke about. You are my death, Sunless. Didn't you know? Then, Noctis suddenly cleared his throat and awkwardly looked away. That is if I lose, of course. Don't kill me by mistake if I win. That would be very inconvenient, a bit funny, though. Sunny glared at him for a while, then faced the ivory city and scoffed. I know, you'd better win, then. As the moon disappeared and the sky slowly grew brighter, Noctis and the members of the cohort gathered together and silently watched the sun rise. The five of them had just accomplished something truly impossible. They had battled an army and two immortal transcendents under the dim light of the crimson moon, and won. The army had retreated, the immortals were dead. And the five of them, somehow, were still alive. And yet, none of them felt relieved or triumphant. The incandescent disk of the sun was rising like the blade of a guillotine, ready to cut down their lives. The sorcerer was sitting on the grass with his eyes closed, gathering his strength for the approaching fight with the ivory dragon, trying to recover from his wounds as much as he could. Effie lay on the ground, too battered and tired to move. Cassie was tending to her wounds. Kai was grimly counting the arrows he had managed to gather. His charred mask was gone, revealing his burned, disfigured face. Sunny was standing a small distance away, looking at a small statuette that lay in the palm of his hand, connected to a thin chain. The statuette was cast of iron and depicted a beautiful young woman wielding a spear in one hand and gripping a human heart in the other, her nakedness covered only by a beast hide tied around her thighs, her face lost in the shadows. It was very similar to the statue of war god he had seen on his first day in the nightmare, but different in one detail: there was blood flowing from the wound in the statuette's chest, as though the heart she was holding had once belonged to the young woman herself. Her figure felt strangely familiar. This was the memory he had received for killing Solvain the second time. The runes read. Memory. Dying wish. Memory rank. Transcendent. Memory tier. Memory type. Charm. Memory description. A young woman once wished to be free, but could only find her freedom in death. She called upon it, and touched by her sincerity, death came. But instead of embracing it herself, the young woman delivered death to those who held her in chains. Memory enchantments. Death wish. Enchantment description. Those who witness the wielder of this memory are compelled, friends to be inspired, foes to seek the wielder out. The power of the memory grows the more enemies they give the gift of death, and can be consumed to heal the wielder's wounds. Death charge. 0/1000. Sunny hesitated for a bit, and then dismissed the charm with a sigh. This new powerful memory of his could be extremely useful, without a doubt, especially its ability to bring him back from the brink of death. However, he suspected that he would have to kill 1,000 enemies to make that healing really worthwhile. It was still a powerful ability to have, but not in the current situation. He would have to build the charm's charge up for a long time to make use of it. For now, there was only one kill he was concerned about. He was going to deliver the killing blow to either Noctis, or the Ivory Lord. As if answering his thoughts, a sudden movement attracted his attention, out there in the Ivory City. And then, a thundering roar split the world apart. The dragon was coming.